Okay. We are now recording. Fantastic.
Excellent. And do I need to, you're going to give me back co-host rights?
Yeah, actually, it may just keep working. Can you see if it works?
Okay.
We're still on your screen. So if you can
that.
can you just move around?
Sure.
Perfect. All right. We are
Yes. Fabulous.
We're golden. Yay. Okay.
Yay,
Sorry for that.
No worries. So again, if we just started recording, I'll introduce myself, Kim Penberthy, and just an introduction to the Division of Perceptual Studies that I'm part of. Founded in '67. We do research looking literally at sort of the relationship between the mind and brain at sort of the next level that you don't always see at an academic institution. So Jim Tucker took over the work of Ian Stevenson, and he's now still looking at children who remember past lives. Ian called these cases of the reincarnation type. So you will often in the literature see them called court research. And Bruce Grayson is a psychiatrist who works in the area of near-death experiences and has a new book coming out actually about his sort of transformation in doing this work. He's a very fascinating fellow. I've done work in after-death communications, so these are sort of the reports. Again, a lot of this research is sort of accumulating data, building up a repository. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of cases and documents of standardized assessments of these folks who report this. We just finished a large international study that was headed out of Switzerland, looking at after-death communications, just trying to describe them. Who has them? What are they? What do they mean to people? Do these change people's lives? That sort of thing. And then the work I do is more of the benign, sort of boring work. I'm considered sort of the bland one in the group because my work is mostly focused on looking at intentional abilities to change consciousness. So if you think about it, children who remember past lives, people who have near-death experiences, these things just happen to them. They don't intentionally try to bring that about. I study more about what happens if you can intentionally cultivate these altered states of consciousness and what kind of impact does that have. We also have Ed Kelly, who is the gentleman there in the middle of the picture who runs the Ray Westphal Neuroimaging Lab. So we have the ability, we have wonderful facilities to do all kinds of imaging studies and experiments in specific areas that are sort of like protected with respect to, different wavelengths can't get in and that sort of thing. We can control that. So we also do those sort of explorations, looking at what is happening when people are having these extraordinary abilities. And I got into this early on. I was one of those weird kids who learned about transcendental meditation when I was very young, read Raymond Moody's books, who was also affiliated with DOPS at UVA, and really had a strong interest in this since the beginning. But like Gregg said, I chose a path of psychology and soon had that beaten out of me and just learning my statistics and doing my stuff in psychology, and became a clinical psychologist, seeing patients, and really fascinated by the therapeutic approaches and constantly learning as new therapies came online. Marsha Linehan's DBT, different things like the CBASP that I was trained in, the cognitive behavioral analysis system of psychotherapy, and really exploring all kinds of transpersonal therapeutic approaches, as well as the nice CBT. And in working with patients, I started seeing things that were happening, that they were reporting, that were not anticipated by me. So these are just some brief examples of, I do a group of DBT skills training, and over years started getting reports from these folks that they were noticing more synchronicities. They saw heightened intuition. We didn't know what was going on, but I thought this was really fascinating. It was really helpful for them. And just started piquing my curiosity. And sure enough, I found in Marsha Linehan's work, there's little side comments about that. Also I have worked a lot with addiction and had a specialty in that for some training, and noticed that when we would often teach some sort of mindfulness approach or meditative approach, the patients would report these unusual experiences that were often very, very helpful. One male, for instance, during meditation heard a female voice, which was a very assertive type of voice, not anyone he knew. It wasn't like his mother or grandmother, but it led to the elimination of his cravings. Saw a patient with cancer and depression and PTSD, a lot of grief. And she reports that the touch of her deceased mother really improved her depressive symptoms. And this came about after we were instigating some mindfulness practices for her. So I began to really get interested in this intentional cultivation of an altered state of consciousness with these, not just looking at some of the traditional therapy I had done and research I had done, looking at, mindfulness practices to reduce things like your blood pressure. And so that's very interesting and helpful. Obviously, I got really excited though when I started thinking about these extraordinary experiences that we were talking about here. And if you look, do some deep research in this area, these are really what they would call the cities in some of the specialties. They're rarely assessed. We don't typically look at them even when we're doing mindfulness research. And if you look at the traditions, these are expected. They're often discouraged from, people are discouraged from intentionally pursuing them. So because they sort of have this ego involvement, and yet they are happening in these therapeutic approaches we're using. I'm sure of it. I see it all the time. So I started looking at, can we intentionally look at this, and can there be funding for this? Is there research we can look at? Because at DOPS, it felt very much like the next step. They were studying spontaneous sort of things like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. And I thought, well, can I intentionally induce some of this? So I started really looking around. What are people doing? What other experiences are they describing? And started connecting with other people who were looking at this also. There's not that many of them. Willoughby Britton is a PhD psychologist who's looking at the negative experiences that people have. She's at Brown, and noticed that she had a lot of undergrads who were coming with really what you might call bad meditation trips. And she started looking at that. But what I was talking about was really something different, is these sort of impact on more extraordinary abilities. And so obviously in our culture now, meditation, mindfulness has become more accepted as sort of a mainstream component in all these different areas you'll see listed here. I was looking at, well, what effect would just sort of that mid-level, sort of straight off the shelf meditation instruction do? Would this alter anything along these cities? And the abilities I'm talking about are not just sort of psychic abilities, extraordinary, phenomenal things like I can move a chair across the room. I'm talking about the other cities that are listed, things like reduction in the appetitive drives. Meditation's been used for addiction for a long time now. And also looking at the impact of your relationship with others, self and other, and compassion. One of the cities is this increased compassion, this ability to now feel more for another person and demonstrate compassion. So one of the first studies I was able to get funding for from the Contemplative Sciences Center at UVA was a study with college students where we just literally taught them during a course. It was a sort of a survey course of the different meditative approaches with One component was the historical knowledge about these different practices, and then the second component was actually implementing them. And what we found is just having them take the course and filling out some assessments pre, midline, and post, we found these significant reductions, improvements in self-compassion, anxiety reductions, improvements in positive coping, and improvements in mindfulness. So that was really interesting to me. The next study I got to see, and again, I'm going to be talking about some studies. If you want to say something, please speak up or save it to the end. But I'm trying not to go into a lot of technical detail, just sort of giving you the big brush strokes. I had the opportunity, again, through the Contemplative Sciences Center that I'm part of. We got funding from the Alliance for Lupus Research and developed a contemplative-based intervention for patients suffering from lupus. This was really exciting for me because if you're familiar at all with a lot of the mindfulness meditation research, it's predominantly on a white upper middle class population. But we don't have a lot of information in the US anyway, in North America, about studies looking at other kinds of populations. And so if you know anything about lupus, it is unfortunately a very common autoimmune disorder that's typically prevalent in women of color. So I was happy to be able to develop an intervention for this subpopulation. And we're still analyzing this data. This was an enormous amount of data because we developed a contemplative-based intervention for patients with lupus and their support person. So most of the patients, we did extensive work ahead of time with focus groups, really trying to make sure we could adapt the intervention to this patient population so it was meaningful, they felt safe, and it met their needs. And over again, what we heard was that people did not feel heard. Lupus is an autoimmune disorder, and similar to many autoimmune disorders, people will not look sick and they will feel horrible. They will be very impaired and have problems functioning and yet still look okay, quote unquote. And so the lupus patients really said they needed to have their support people in there as well to help them understand what they were going through. So we developed an intervention that required both of them to attend. And this was unique because the Alliance for Lupus Research was really looking for an impact biologically. They wanted, it was fine and well if we increase their intuition and their ability to have self-compassion, but they really wanted to say, can you change their inflammatory responses and that sort of thing, and markers of disease. And the preliminary research we have right now shows that we can. So these are actually significant findings. CIBL is what we called it, the contemplative-based intervention for lupus. So you can see the baseline ratings, 1 and 2, and then post-CIBL, and the IL, that IL marker is an anti-inflammatory marker. There we go. And of course, then the creatinine levels were lower as well. So that was really exciting. And yet still not exactly what I'm really interested in. So for me, the real interest is, can we implement these interventions for people to really help them go to the next level with respect to this enlightenment component? Can we help increase their feelings of oneness and interconnectedness, their compassion, this sense of connectedness that often a transcendent experience can promote? And can we intentionally do that without drugs, without a near-death experience, and look at that? So we know there seems to be a significant relationship between the amount of meditation and side performance. And a lot of this research is done, as you might expect, on the West Coast. So I have also collaborated with IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Palo Alto and in Paloma, sorry. And we have been conducting research together as well, really looking at these extraordinary abilities. And as I said earlier, I'm really trying to drill down, not just on these that you see here, like psychokinesis or clairaudience or telepathic, but really looking at the more and more, I'm interested in that social connection, that feeling of oneness that I think is so important in this day and age. One of the studies that they did out in Petaluma, and this was before I was collaborating with them, but I think was really interesting. They did a giant survey of people who meditate and looked at exactly what sort of experiences they were having in this realm. And what you saw was larger numbers than they ever really anticipated, endorsing that these experiences happen to them regularly. So you see the numbers here, which to me were just mind-boggling. I thought it was going to be maybe 5 or 10%, but a lot of people reporting that they had these sort of experiences meditating. And these were just normal, average people, not you know, masters of this, not people that had gone off to a mountain or anything. So again, some more extraordinary numbers you see here. And I thought, well, you know, you can explain this because these are the California people that, you know, that were gravitated to IONS, which is a place that folks come to learn meditation and that sort of thing. So what they did after that was a study looking at different cohorts. And again, having them meditate and looking at these experiences that they have. And what you found were, again, these huge numbers. You see here the extraordinary experiences on the far left. And they surveyed the general population, and they surveyed scientists, people who called themselves scientists, and then enthusiasts. So these enthusiasts were the people who went to meditation retreats, went to Esalen, places like that, you know, had dropped acid a couple times, did all kinds of stuff to explore this sort of part of themselves. And what you see here really are that the numbers are not all, you know, all that different. You've got, oops, sorry, 93% of the scientists reporting at least one experience that was extraordinary along these realms, and they had to list them out. So knowing things, feeling in touch with someone far away, knowing something about the future, being in touch with a deceased person, remote viewing, so seeing something that you can't possibly see if you were in your own physical body, and having out-of-body experiences. And when you ask people, I've noticed this, and maybe it's because I'm very open with my patients and receptive, and they sense that. It's remarkable when you're open to this, what you will hear from people, everyday people, and how they experience the world, and if they feel safe enough to share that with you. So this is when I started collaborating with IONS, and we did a prospective study that was funded from the Bial Foundation. This is a foundation, a pharmaceutical company out of Portugal that also has a wing of their business that funds this kind of extraordinary research. And we've been fortunate enough to continue to get funding from them. So we looked at a prospective study of people signed up for meditation retreats, comparing them to folks who did not meditate, did not want to meditate, and just did some continuous assessment along the way. And we did find what our hypothesis was, is that the meditation group reported higher number of these psi experiences, significantly so. And again, you can say, well, they're different. They're not randomized, and so our next study is looking at a randomized study. We have funding for that. We just have IRB approval now. The other interesting thing we do with this is we don't just do assessments of self-report. There's plenty of measures that we do that are self-report that are really helpful, but we also look at actual psi ability. So we collaborated with the computer folks at IONS and had online assessments of things like predicting the next color of a card. You see here, so unconscious precognition, looking at things like that. We have people meditate and try to impact a random number generator. Both they do the meditations alone or with a group, and we look at the if the random number generator goes off random during that specific time period. So it's really, you know, not your typical research that you often get to do as a clinical psychologist, and it's a lot of fun. For me, it's more than fun, though. I really, I have seen these sorts of things literally change people's lives. And it's just really emotional to me. And, you know, I get emotional about this because I've seen it impact people. It saved their lives. It changed how they interacted with their family, their community. And it just, I can't help myself but keep thinking about what it could mean for our world if we could get little light bulbs, you know, above everyone's head, that we are connected in ways we can't even understand, that we have an impact on other people. We have the impact we have on the earth is connected to us. The impact we have on other people comes back to us. So my, you know, my goal for the rest of my career is really going to be pursuing this. How I'm very interested in how this works. I'm more interested in just spreading it to people. The science geek in me is very interested in the neuroimaging, so I continue to be involved in the neuroimaging lab and look at what happens when people are meditating and when they report these extraordinary experiences. And from most of our research anyway, and it's been collaborated with other research outside of our lab, it really looks more like the brain actually stops processing information as actively. So this is sort of a cleaned up version of what you might see, but it's before meditation, you see more activity and less activity when people are meditating. And I think that that's absolutely fascinating, because it's almost like when you talk about the mind and brain, it's and the mind body connection, it's really almost like our active brain is interfering with accessing these aspects of our consciousness. And so for me, I find that very, very alluring to continue in down that path of research. So broadening our sort of standard meditation research to look at these mystical and transcendent experiences, looking at the impact of that on our social and relational relationships, and looking at it, you know, ultimately on our physical environment. What does that mean if we can impact our physical environment in ways we didn't think? And have, what does it mean if we have these extended human capacities? You know, someone mentioned, I think it was this group, the mutant message down under. Was that here? Maybe not, but this is a wonderful book about the Aboriginals was that here, Greg? I can't remember.
I don't think so, but maybe.
Okay. It's a book about Aborigines, one of the tribes that was sort of relocated to the central part of Australia. And their view is that, of course, telepathy is one of the abilities humans have. It's that us mutants have lost it because we fill up our heads and things with other things, and we've lost that ability. It's a wonderful book. It's not super well written, but it's interesting. It's a medical doctor who went there to work and lived with them for a while and realized she was the mutant. So anyway, so looking at these prospective studies, expanding our methods and expanding the questions we ask to really look at what would be the impact of finding out about it, our expanded consciousness on our community and our world and our future. And this is just to prove to you that you can get funding to do this. You can publish. I've done both. So I think for any, you know, young person I have a lot of young people come to me. They're very interested in this topic. It's obviously very sexy and exciting to many people. I would say I can give you guidance. There's a way to do this and have a career. I think it's so important. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone who has questions now or in the future. So thank you very much. I get really excited. Can you tell?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
that's,
so I can stop sharing now.
okay. Yeah, this can bring us to a wide variety. This is excellent. So yeah, at the bottom of your screen is a little green thing that would say stop sharing. Or actually, it's at the top. I'm sorry. At the top of your screen. There it is. Okay. All right. So this is wonderful. So we can have good, rich conversations. So let's go ahead and let's open the floor to questions. I think I saw Nick L had a question. He had the proper blue hand raised in the corner. Nick, you want to?
Yeah, I had to jump all over going first here because I love meditation. I talk about meditative experiences all the time. I'm going to be making Gregg sick of hearing me talk about them pretty soon. But we're not quite there yet. So first of all, love the presentation. I mean, I always find it just so fascinating to hear these things. And I really hope you'll share this PowerPoint with us because I would love to review it more and try to pull some sources from it. I like a lot what you said about the active brain interfering with somewhat of this sort of mystical, we call it mystical, but it's really not, or transcendent experience of reality. I agree with that so much because I mean that fits the contemplative traditions in that this reality is the sort of the bare reality. These skills they seem extraordinary, but they're only extraordinary in comparison to what we have kind of conceptualized as what our brain is capable of doing.
Right.
There's all of this is just untapped potential that's already there right in front of us. It's right in front of our nose and we can't see it. So I thought that was just a fantastic observation that you made there. The big question I do have, and it's one that I see in a lot of research on meditation, is sometimes it's a straight up failure. Other times it's just not very clear in differentiating exactly what type of meditation, what practice was used. Right. A lot of them, there's so much overlap and some are vastly different. So I'm wondering if you can speak to your knowledge on the differential effects of different practices.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a huge question, and that's a big problem with the literature. Even though we've got the mindfulness based stress reduction is typically what you see in a lot of the mainstream research that's looking at sort of impact on medical medical issues. And so that's the good thing about that is that has been at least standardized and structured as an 8-week intervention with sort of manualized. The challenge is that many people, and I, I've done this myself, sort of modify what they're doing for the situation. And so, for instance, what we had been doing was more of a Zen Buddhist approach with the lupus patients when we worked with them in the small groups and got the focus group information that sort of felt more accessible to them. We're now looking at, we're going to be using Richie Davidson's mindfulness approach, which is moving sort of away from that. It's a different sort of a approach. But you're right, it's a problem because we're sort of mixing and matching, and often in the literature, it's not really thoroughly described what exactly is happening. We are trying to get much more simple and straightforward, and so sort of drill deeper instead of this sort of broad expanse of exposure, if that makes any sense. So, especially now that the research I'm looking at right now is really, for me, I really want to focus on connection, on that connectedness and that sort of compassion and social responsibility. And so that's sort of a different level, and you need to sort of drill deeper into that. What sort of contemplative practice is that? That's more of a loving kindness, more of a metta, where you're sort of connecting with others.
Like ComMO.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, a lot of it does, though, that's one of the challenges is, what are people doing, and which one is best for what sort of things. And we're just at the beginning of that. It's a really good question. I wish to goodness that I had way more for you.
I ran
yeah,
into this.
yeah, for me, I'm really looking at awareness and connection. That's sort of the main theme going forward. Because, yeah.
Rob and then Joe.
Yeah, thank you. First off, Kim, that was amazing. And I love this meditation. It's deeply important. I teach it. I'm always looking for sort of the essence of it and how it's doing certain things. And in a lot of ways, I think some of those things can be deeply generative and like on command, transcendent experiences in everyday life and things like that. So I'm a huge fan. A lot of the things that you started talking about seem very valuable from a subjective perspective for sure. So, a deceased person's touch, ending addiction, and those kinds of things are great. Part of it starts to worry me a little bit where we could begin creating some subjective experiences as objectively real. And that can start to tend toward very unhealthy nonsense, in some of the worst cases. So when you mention things like children describing past lives, are these describing lives that we know of and that we can see that they have information that they wouldn't have otherwise? Like, is that tied to any, objective reality that we could do, or like the random generating stuff? Did that have a math thing that stood out as like, wow, they were really doing something that was objectifiably true also? Because I know there's a ton of the subjective side of things that are really valuable, but I'm wondering, you're starting to get into that external space as well. And I just was curious about some of that.
Right. No, that's really good. So I, just to be clear, I was sort of describing what we do at DOPS, what researchers do. So Jim Tucker is the primary person who does the research with children who remember past lives. Ian Stevens started this with mainly children in India, Pakistan, that's place or where they were reported. Jim has moved to looking at cases in the US, and these are mostly descriptive. And he has written books and manuscripts, they absolutely have to be validated. So these are, and he only works with children because they're less likely to be manufactured for, publicity or that sort of thing. So, I have mixed feelings about it, mostly because as a researcher, it's all descriptive. It's even though you're going back and you're verifying that, yes, this person existed, and yes, during this time, and yes, this was the house they lived in, it's still, but that's sort of the nature of that research. It's collecting ethnographic information, it's collecting data, and yes, you verify it. It's very similar to the near-death experiences. We have in our cardiac rooms, things, for instance, you can make it as scientific as you can. We have items hidden up at the top that you could only see if you were floating above. And so there's been ongoing studies with our medical system where we're looking at people in cardiac arrest who report near-death experiences, and then we go in and question them and see if they know what's up there. And so you get what you can, but it's still descriptive. So that's different. I'm not as involved in that research, although my colleagues are. Yeah. And the random number generator, this is brand new for us. It's, at least for my research, they've been using it for a while at DOPS. It's literally a machine that just generates numbers. It's in a contained, sealed room that cannot be penetrated. I mean, you're talking about a room that's like radiation proof. And it's on all the time and running with a time stamp meter type things. So we know when we ask people to focus on it and try to get it off, or we instruct them in a variety of different ways, that what we're looking at is going to be, very rare that would go off random by accident. Something's influencing it electronically. So it's more of a psychic sort of thing.
Yeah.
Again, it's limited how you assess anything like this. I mean, because it is so challenging. We were really challenged to look at, so someone asked earlier, what does psi mean? Psi is like the psychic, is short for psychic abilities, basically. So it's looking at these, what in other traditions are called siddhis, or extraordinary abilities. These are qualities that humans may have that we're trying to assess. And so it was really hard to come up with computer programs where you need to predict something, or you present something for an amount of time that would be impossible for someone to actually process the information, and then you ask.
Yeah, I mean, there's people have been studying that kind of stuff for a really long time, and I hadn't ever heard of anything that had sort of not been, as close to random as other things. So that was my question, was there any new data on some of that sort of showing a real tendency toward some of that being more real, objectifiably? Right.
That and that it was a bust for our study. And although the self-report stuff was significant, the actual psi findings were not.
Got it.
And so that's why we keep trying different things to see what is possible. And it may be that that's just a really bigger challenge than we're up for with our science right now.
Yeah. And by the way, when you describe like how we interact with each other and how we interact with the world, that seems very obvious to me and deeply important. And so, I'm all for it, let's all.
Amen. Love and connection.
Let's all decide on that,
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate it.
Joe?
There. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted, brother.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
And thank you, Kim, for that wonderful presentation. I'm an outsider to most of these, this area and the research and so forth, and I'm a sociologist and criminologist, so I'm quite removed from the work that most of you folks do. But that said, my wife does healing touch, and so I've engaged with her in a lot of discussions and some research in the last year or two, and we did a meta-analysis of the healing touch literature. So it's the closest parallel I have to what you're talking about, Kim. And perhaps unsurprisingly, at least in the published refereed literature, you do see the meta-analysis does reveal some significant positive impacts of healing touch. And the problems are methodological, mostly in the sense that there's no standardized treatments. You've got varying lengths of sessions, numbers of sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to pin down, well, what's having the effect? And then when you look for what are the actual effects, they are things like decreased levels of anxiety, decreased levels of depression, improved self-esteem, a number of these psychological things that many of you folks study, and Kim, some of what you were talking about as well, at least in the short term. So I have two points to make. One is, have you done any follow-ups to see the long-term efficacy? Because what I find is that in a lot of the research, when you have the immediate intervention, there's a short-term effect. There's that, that ramp up. But then what's sustained 6 months, 12 months down the road, or what have you? So I'll stop there. I'll just ask first that, and then I have one other point to make.
Well, so we don't have a lot of data on the long-term effect, absolutely. Right. And so more studies, we're trying to get better at that and do the long-term follow-up. Part of the difficulty is many people, if you're teaching an intervention, they stop doing the intervention. Right. And so then you don't have those salubrious effects, and you're not sure what's causing what. So we definitely, in this area, there's always going to be that caveat. We need more. Absolutely. And someone asked earlier about the duration with the lupus patients. That was a 6-week intervention with a 2-month follow-up. And, we had to be very careful. It was 2.5 hours, but that's a lot to ask of a lupus patient. And so, not everyone can do that. We had to be gentle with that. But yeah, we need longer terms. And for me, what I'm really interested in is, and I don't know how to articulate this so well, but for myself and some other people, I've seen the ability to incorporate this knowledge or these experiences, a mystical experience, a transcendent experience, something powerful, some insight, and just maintain it. So like, what would it take to help someone comprehend that there is more than what we see, that we're connected, and just live with that and have that as sort of part of their knowledge. So that they don't have to practice. It's not so much that I have to get up and meditate and this is what I do, and it's like medicine I take and I have to take it every day. It becomes sort of part and parcel of who you are.
So can I jump in on that point then?
Absolutely.
With my follow-up? So, okay, so the follow-up then is that part of the reason that this is so challenging in my view, or what you're expressing, that is that we have the intervention and you have a lot of attention and energy focused on that, and with the patients and with the clients and so on. And then you say, well, why can't we want to make this part of the natural, style of living, and et cetera, et cetera. But part of the problem, I would say as the sociologist, is because people go back into their normal environments.
Mm-hmm.
They're lived in, so it becomes, and it's an incredibly complex world with lots of countervailing forces that then undermines in many cases. And then oftentimes, even in people's inner circles, you've got people who are undermining the therapeutic interventions, right? So you've got people who are working on themselves, or working on, these things that you're talking about, or the other kinds of things that clinicians deal with, and you're trying to make improvements, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got, you go back into the same family, into the same job environment, into the same social world, whatever, and all of that entails, okay? So to me, that's what's so confounding and makes this an incredibly complex thing, because you can help work and change the individual, but you can't change everything else that's surrounding that individual, right? So that's part of the challenge. And then to the other point that I wanted to make is that, to me, the real limitation with the healing touch literature and with what you're trying to get at as well, and this is not a criticism, this is somebody who genuinely wants to figure this out along with everybody, is that we don't know what those mechanisms are then. And you say, well, we know there's something happening, or we're connected and so forth. And I'm convinced, or at least I'm hypothesizing, that this is about energy, and it's about energy flows. And so what I've told my wife is, I said, if you want healing touch to get major funding, along with mainstream medicine, I said, you need to identify the mechanisms by which these interventions have their immediate and sustained impacts. So what are those mechanisms? Yeah, we see lower blood pressure, lower anxiety. So we know something physical is happening. But again, maybe this is just the Western male, background that I have. I want to know what the mechanism is that's leading to that particular outcome. Just as, when you give a drug, you want to see what the impact is on the cellular or metabolic responses, right? So, but that said, I am open to this idea that maybe it has to do with energy flows. Is there a way that we can tap into, heat and photons and energy? I'm just spitballing here, and figure out ways to measure energy flows and how that's transmitted. Or am I just sounding like an idiot now? I have no idea.
No, you're not. I think actually we may have lost Kim there briefly. So she's really listening attentively, at least for
right. Really intense.
Yep, I think we lost her. So she probably got.
That's what happens when I start to talk. I drive people away. I don't know.
No, I think. I mean, yeah, Casey, when she comes back, will if I presume we'll be able to. She'll have her rejoin us. So. Actually, I guess one of the things I'll offer is my own reflections on what I would call psi phenomena. And I was going to talk with Kim about this, but I'll share some thoughts here because I think at least where I am in relationship to this, I'll share that. So, I come from the men's tradition, of mechanism, of sort of new atheist, hardcore, science tradition. So in my 20s, and early 20s, that's all just bullshit. Basically, if it's not part of a particular, if there isn't a pretty clear mechanism, you're going to talk about mind without the brain, then that's off the rail in relation. So that's where I come from. I am not exactly there now, but I'm not all the way on the other side of that either. So here's where what I realize that I'm trying to do with the whole tree of knowledge system and theory of knowledge gestalt is to get our knowledge systems coherently aligned at the level of, so we can have the reliable empirical stuff organized in a clear descriptive metaphysics, which we don't have. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay. And in carving that out, then what I want to say is, well, here is the empirical. We certainly know that the brain's involved in the mind. Okay. And to talk about a mind without a brain, well, that's going to get you in a lot of descriptive metaphysical confusions pretty quick. Okay. In other words, well, what do you then mean? All right. At the same time, the psi phenomena has been investigated. There's a lot of empirical research, as well as anecdotal research, hard scientific, that is very hard just to wave your hands, explain away. Okay. Now, they can't pinpoint mechanisms, but they can show empirical effects in ways that are very weird. All right. It's so much so from my vantage point, kind of like UFOs and a whole bunch of other stuff, that's the edge of our descriptive metaphysics. I'm agnostic about it. I'm open. I'm curious. I have been convinced that we should be open, that serious data are in that say we should be open. I also haven't seen anything at the level of mechanism that doesn't get you out of a descriptive metaphysical nightmare, meaning what the hell are you talking about that actually connects to the real world? And if it doesn't connect to the real world, you're going to have dual world philosophy problems, meaning you don't know what it is. Now, Joe's comment about energy, my fundamental elements are energy information. Okay. So energy information, not matter, it's energy information. And these things, so this sets the stage for the potential of tracking these things that does provide you with, in my estimation, the right descriptive metaphysical frame that at least sets the stage for us to potentially uncover and make sense out of this fascinating phenomenon. So that's kind of where I am in relation.
Can I piggyback on some of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I love that too. And I heard energy also, and it's like sort of that's the beginning part that's going to be all through everything, right? So I'm sure that's at play. When I watch a presentation like this, there are to me, there's some of it that is so obviously highly useful right now that does have means of application and long-term shifting, right? So immediate changes and then permanent changes in relationship to information and self and all these other things. And then some that may be fringe that would be really interesting, but are like, even if they were there, they don't really kind of solve the important problems anyway. But, really having a sense of being one with everything, or at least having an access to that frame of mind as a part of yourself is deeply meaningful, very quickly in 1,000 different ways. Access to transcendental states. If we were to make it the simplest level of transcending self, it would be, are you capable of putting down yourself to truly listen to another, right? Can you really model another's point of view, which is the very beginning stages of transcending ego and self and just, thinking about what you're going to say while they're talking, right? The next might be flow states where you're so captured in an activity that, you really lose yourself in the doing of something. After that might be a deep sense of like gratitude and awe and wonder. And you get into these, and these are things that you can train people into where they have a much more consistent everyday experience of having access to those and doing it. Joe, to your point, or Joseph, I don't know if you go by Joe, but that pattern that we then go back to, that habit gravity of our everyday life, is a challenge. But some of these things can be very profoundly kind of handed off in a training or a set of tools that then they really like advance our ability to relate to each other. Whether we have telekinesis or not, those would be amazing. And, I want those to be studied and I want those to be understood. but I don't even know that that necessarily, I mean, if we all repeatedly had that ability, I guess that'd be a huge game changer, of course. But I'm not seeing evidence that that's consistently. And then when you get into the math of random generators and stuff, you know, there's a period of time where that would hit a bunch of times in a row, but can that person come back and do it repeatedly? And then what does that even mean if you have that ability? Versus, can we find loving kindness, which we really can? Can we find a deeper sense of continued gratitude? We really can. And so we're very far along in some of those stats that were mixed in with other ones that seem, you know, maybe not even as important, but still interesting, of course. But that was my takeaway. Yeah.
May I just jump in real quick? One final comment on this from my perspective, and a positive comment. Not to sound like a positivist, but every
those are horrible.
Sorry, but to your points, and to somewhat Nicholas has been messaging as well, and Casey, literally, I think every single intervention my wife has done is in healing touch. As you talk about the immediacy and the effects of, has had an immediate effect and a positive effect. Sometimes small, often large. So there's no question to me that the evidence reveals that she, you know, however it's happening, there's a really positive effect. If nothing more than simply somebody taking an hour out of their day and, you know, having somebody, if you will, exercise loving kindness toward them.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right? And then from my side, when I just do this little delivery job on the side, this thing that I do, every time I do something for somebody and deliver their furniture for them or whatever, it's amazing the sense of relief and the positive energy and what they experience. I'm not doing any therapy, but I'm having this amazing therapeutic effect just by driving my truck and helping them out, right?
Yeah.
So this is my little summer lawn experiment.
Yeah, so one thing that's really interesting is, you know, showers work perfectly to get you clean, but you need another one tomorrow, right? Or depending on how often you shower, right? Healing, like massage from someone may, you know, clearly has an immediate effect, but it doesn't work forever because the challenges of life are going to keep doing that. But if you get an internal change with your ability and who you are, that then translates to dealing with future complexity that can be more persistent. So some forms of change are more persistent and helpful, and some are like just getting help. So Reiki touch or whatever, again, if that's some magical form of touch, or if it's just, to your point, loving care and attention that was meaningful and felt amazing and really moved the needle in that thing. I've had that work, I mean, a thousand times, but having somebody touch you and then you never have pain again in your life, right? That's not gonna, that's just doesn't, it's not the kind of change that's going to persist in the same way that if somebody learns something new about the world and they keep that knowledge, they're then different from that point on, you know, continually. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, we have Kim back. I think I was going to have Casey, but I saw that Casey had to go. Welcome back, Kim. Can you hear? Kim, are you able to hear us? Maybe not.
I think she froze again.
Nope, there she is. Hey, can you hear us, Kim? Can you?
Hey, yeah, the power went out and the generator cut on. So.
Okay. Well, welcome back. One of the things that
I can, yes.
You can. Oh, you can hear us. Okay, so I think we're losing a little bit of the. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your sort of sense-making journey around this? And what I mean by that is, so if we were to say, well, okay, the mind without the brain, right? Can you share with me, can you tell me how you make sense out of that concept? Because I think that we get into sort of the mechanism. We have a mechanistic kind of way of thinking about the world. I think it's very powerful in many ways. And at the same time, so I was just curious to hear your journey of sense making around these kinds of sort of what I would call sort of descriptive metaphysical issues, which are sort of like, okay, yeah, these are my concepts. This is how I sort of put them together. Yep. Okay. Oh, well, the gods have conspired against us to keep us from that question. So, all right. Are there we could possibly ask questions in the chat if she's I think the
Yeah,
connection's just not quite.
bandwidth is very
Okay. Well, were there other discussion points? If we'll see if she's able to come back online. Were there other discussion points or questions or things that we would be useful for us from a Theory of Knowledge Society
Hello
perspective?
again.
Oh, hey. Yep.
Here, I don't know what it's like there, but the connection is very poor.
Right.
I have all kinds of secrets to share, but the universe is conspiring against that. Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll be able to, we'll find a time to revisit this
But
and then
Greg,
solve
the
this
question
problem.
I heard you ask is
Okay.
yes.
Kim, if you
Right.
can hear me, maybe you could dial in with the phone line instead, so that way audio would not be disturbed. So if video goes in and out, if you just call
Yeah,
in.
if you just take your video camera off, that might help a little.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can see.
So
Try
can
to
you
that.
hear me?
Yes. Can
Yeah.
you? Of course, now we're.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you heard my question about mind and brain and mechanism and just your own sense making, if you heard that, we'd love to hear your reflections about that.
Yeah. I think that would take an entire a series of conversations, because that's an enormous question, and one
Yeah.
the division has written two large that go into that that they've really influenced me. I think it's more than I can go into here. But to me, from
Kim, I think we just keep losing her. Well, that's too bad. So
I think if you could dial in, Greg, that would be from a cell phone using the conference number. That would make it reliable.
if she dialed in,
Using with the
okay,
Zoom meeting, you get
like with her phone.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we lost her. Budan, did you have a question that you could ask us? Oh, there's Kim again. I don't know if Budan's here.
Unmute. Yeah, I've unmuted myself.
Okay.
Yeah, just a question.
Greg.
I wanted to know how this relates to your general studies about integrating an integrating vision for the future. I heard some good comments that you made at the conference this morning or early this afternoon, and you were good in integrating the levels of knowledge and the big history into your understanding of psychology. So that's one good point that I've never heard anybody make as a psychologist. Okay, so first of all, I have to give you credit for that. The second, you identified the meaning crisis in our society, which is basically what John Bernanke talks about, and I go to his sessions. I'm from Toronto.
Great.
So I asked him the question, what happens after one becomes enlightened? And, he's basically advocates one should develop a sense of personal meaning through conversion experiences. You go beyond that, which I find interesting. You make suggestions that we need to integrate, and these are all suggestions that we need to integrate what is disconnected and disintegrated in modern society by elements of postmodernism and the whole disintegration that the historical devolution presents us with, which Jordan Peterson does not mention and address, which I find scary. But you do that, and so does John Bernanke, and you build on him, and you come up with some elements of the new meta-narrative. Once again, these are elements that could be included in the new meta-narrative. The lady that talked today, maybe that's just one element that could be included, but there are a variety of elements you suggested today, like economics, and you suggested science and religion, and you suggest even some kind of symbolic, holistic metal or symbol, you know, in terms of a projection, which I find a bit simplistic, not knowing how these elements will be coordinated. So I find that a bit, you know, it's hopeful. It's hopeful, and it suggests that there is some new meta-narrative possibly being born. However, I find this to be quite a challenge, the birth of a new meta-narrative, because there's so many disintegrated and contradictory elements in our societies because of levels of development, because of different religions, because of science's conflict with religion, because of even now, we've got a disconnected society because of our disease condition. So we have a lot of problems that militate against your so-called future vision of integration. So how do you deal with this lack of this disintegration and contradiction, which does exist because of the meaning crisis, which you have identified? I found that really positive, and because of the levels of evolutionary development, could we perhaps you know, integrate a belief in evolutionary, personal evolutionary development as an extension of evolutionary development, which this psychologist talks about, the one that wrote the book on flow. I think you know him.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah, his book is called The Evolving Self, and I found that to be the closest to some kind of future positive vision based on big history. That's the only one that I could find in my library. But then I came across yours, and I didn't really have a chance to explore your book in depth. I just heard the talk today, and there wasn't much time in between. But how could you address these contradictory elements that militate against an integrated vision? But you're already promoting metal, but you know, we're talking about real tensions and contradictions that exist.
Amen. Right. Well, first off, probably smart money would bet against it. We can start there. In the sense that you're right, there's an enormous number of, we are experiencing a meaning crisis, the current context of fragmented pluralism. There's an enormous number of social forces pulling against any particular kind of synthetic integrative force. And so, yeah, there's a huge amount of inertia and entropy and force against. So let's start there and recognize that that's the status equilibrium quo, as it were. Okay. So then the question is, well, what are you swimming upstream against, and then how are you going to leverage that in a way that is then that's going to serve as a catalyst for change? What are the currents that you see that might foster that leverage, and what is the vision that's being fostered? Who can hear it? And then how do you network that together with other visions to create a collective, intelligent, developmental transition? So those are all the more stratified and strategic elements that come to bear. If you want, you and I will have to set up a phone call. If you want the intricacy insider baseball version, that if you believe in the theory of knowledge system that I constructed, and then you will learn what the iQuad coin means and what the garden behind me means, and how it puts together the various sciences and humanities to create a consilient schematic that then is plausible, believable, and then can be shared and networked with other what are called integrative, pluralistic, big picture views like big history, and then to create a momentum of individuals who are not part of the old empiricist broken system or the postmodern fragmented pluralistic system, but actually embrace a meta-modern integrative pluralistic vision about how we can be and actually morally how we need to be if we are going to survive the 21st century. Well, I believe that there's a rhetorical narrative. I believe that there's an analytical narrative. I believe that there's a procedural narrative that at least gives hope for addressing the challenges that you raise and ultimately making the long-term difference that I see as possible. But like I said, I'd bet against me, given the force.
No, I like that you've identified all the. I like that you've identified all the elements here, and I want to pursue that further by reading more. And because once again, today's my first day of initiation, so I want to. I mean, you have a holistic vision of what has happened and what the elements are theoretically and practically. The question would be, how do we catalyze this? And, you know, there are a lot of there's a lot of complexity, and it incorporates a lot of multiple frameworks of development, which is very interesting. How do we integrate and how do we proceed? And we need community and we need mythology and we need rituals. We need to almost create a new religion.
Yep.
You know, which is a meta narrative, basically.
Right, exactly. And I'm working with John Vervaeke, by the way, on that.
We've got elements of this, and you have elements of this, which is really commendable. It's commendable, you know, that you've gone this far. And that's why you've initiated this, and I find it exciting. Maybe I shouldn't be too critical. I should maybe try to pursue future directions or future possibilities, you know, in all of this, as opposed to just look at the critical landscape that militates against it. I should look at how to overcome this and how to develop imaginary visions, right?
Well, Leah, let's dialogue about that. I think Kim is that Kim, are you back on the line here?
I am back on with the phone. Thanks for the suggestion.
Okay. Yes. So, okay. Thank you. I know several people bolted. We're beginning to wrap up. It does sound like you're a bit clearer. Any other comments then from people or thoughts that you wanted to leave us with? I'm sorry in terms of you had such cool things to say that we got a little broken up at the end there, but is there, you know, kind of as we kind of, maybe we can figure out a way to, you know, move towards bringing this to a close. Did you have things that you were hoping to say, Kim, for us to digest from?
I'm very grateful for everyone's attention and time, and happy to find another community to share this with. And I would just love for people to, you know, look into this further. The DOPS website has an enormous amount of information. It's through the University of Virginia. You just Google DOPS, D-O-P-S, at Virginia, at UVA. So many people I saw in the chat were mentioning different books and researchers, and all of that can be found there. And I think just exploring that further, and we'll continue the conversation. And I really appreciate everyone's time and enthusiasm. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll come back and discuss the concept of mind and brain and God and spirit and all that good stuff at some point. That'll be wonderful.
Wonderful.
Let me say that next we have the next 2 weeks are all lined up. We have Darsha Narvez coming. She's an expert in evolutionary developmental science psychology. She's hooked up with Native Americans and other indigenous individuals, going to talk to us about what's called the evolved nest. So we're going to want to take a developmental angle about how we raise our children, where our society is, what we can learn from indigenous hunter-gatherer kinds of identities and cultures, and which ways in which we can maybe are not doing the best job in giving the right developmental ecology for our children to think about. and ways to move from there. I'm not sure exactly what she's going to talk about. She's a really established scholar, and I look forward to having her. We're then going to have Guy Senstock, the founder of Circling. Circling is a particular relational, empathetic, interpersonal exchange system that is quite powerful, and he's going to tell us the story of circling, and we'll dialogue about that. And then we're going to move off into, I'm going to send out a note. Unfortunately, I teach 4 to 6 on Mondays starting in the fall. So we're going to have to find another time. I'm going to talk to the executive committee, see who can be there when, and then we'll see what feels like the best overall time for our community to meet. And of course, we will be recording these and sharing them, but we want to give as many people an option to join us for our weekly meetings as possible. So that's what we have coming up. And thank you so much, Kim. And thanks everybody for being there. Really appreciate it. We'll rock on. We'll stay in touch. And,
stay safe.
Okay, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
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 Hey, Bodan.
Yeah, I'm going to do more reading because once again, it caught me a bit off guard.
Sure.
I just have your statements in the lecture. So it's really unfair, but I hope I got the gist of it, but I'm trying to fill in the gaps.
Yeah,
so
well,
give me some time to read your literature.
Hey man, I love. Listen, I grew up in a traditional academic, scientific, culture. I like skepticism, and that's all to be embraced. Okay, so I appreciate that. But yeah,
it's not only that. I think that you proposed a vision which I haven't, other than the one here from the evolving self. I haven't seen that proposition, so that is commendable. So I don't want to be negative. I just want to maybe look at the challenges that it represents. Sure. That's all. And I want to read more into your vision and the elaborate dimensions of it.
Great.
With the literature review.
Sure. And I'm actually a good friend of John Vervaeke. He and I are working together. So I know
you've gone further than him, to tell you the truth.
Well,
as he's more focused on individual. You've gone more in terms of social integration and global complexity and integration of elements that he hasn't done. He's just gone one step beyond the meaning crisis into individual personal meaning, which I criticize him for. So once again, I think you've done much better than him and better than Jordan Peterson. So that's why I commend you.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll be happy to. Yes, as far as I'm concerned, that tree of knowledge thing that I shared when I stumbled across it in 1997, it's a game changer because it allows you to analytically consolidate a huge amount of information and then reorient yourself towards understanding the situation that you're in with an enormous amount of context across levels and dimensions, and then set the stage for what we ought to do as the chaotic 21st century that we find ourselves in is very much emerging. So we have a hell of a challenge. But
you're the only one in psychology that I know that has incorporated this big history. So that's fascinating. And
psychologists don't pay attention to this at all, generally.
I discovered this. I'm glad I discovered this.
All right. Well, let's stay in touch. You should be able to find my email. Do you have my email?
Yeah,
you can,
okay. I do. And let me read first, because I want, just to be fair to you, I have to look more into what you've written.
Great. Okay. And we'll be releasing the Theory of Knowledge webpage very shortly. So that actually has a huge amount of information that allow you to, of course, there's my homepage, GreggHenriques.com, but that's about 2 years dated. And then we'll be launching this webpage for this society, and we'll go from there, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and I appreciate everything.
Thanks for coming by. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.